Welcome, everyone. Hey, welcome back to On This Hill, our podcast from Church on the Hill.
We survived the snow and the
We
ice
survived the snow.
and the wind.
Yep. We missed a Sunday. We're back a Sunday. And then when you watch this, you'll have 2 Sundays back since the snow. And I have 2 sermons into the Revelation series.
Yeah, it's been fun. We hope you can catch it somehow, either live or online, but it'll be an interesting journey.
Yeah. For us, we still got Sunday ahead of us, so we've got the one ready to go that's going to be preached that you will have, if you're watching this now, maybe just attended and listened to and been a part of, or maybe you've caught it online.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about the series is how relevant something 2,000 years ago is for today.
Yeah.
Times change, of course, history changes, and players change, but human nature, neither human nature or God change.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's a certain good and bad predictability about it all. So this is Jesus speaking to the church and calling the church up, and promises for overcomers. And
I think part of it's timelessness. Like, certainly it is rooted, in time and space. They're talking to 7 churches that are in Turkey, in what would have been the Asian province of Rome, but because they were real churches with real people and real problems, that's what makes it timeless. Like, we don't have the exact same problems, but we've got problems. We're thinking about our struggles. We're thinking about the end. Where does this all going? What does this mean? What's the meaning behind the events that are taking place right now? It just makes it really, really relevant.
Yeah. Isn't it fascinating, though, that you think, again, things change, technology changes and so forth, but there's something timeless about the human struggle for survival, the human struggle to prosper, the problems that arise, the things we wrestle with. I mean, all the way back to the garden, right? In the garden, you see this perfect place where there was human prospering and relationships were good and the earth worked with us and we worked together. No one was killing each other and no one was fighting. And of course, in the Bible story, in the biblical story, sin messed all that up, turned all that upside down. And since then, it's just been, just the roller coaster of we can do well. We have moments of brilliance and creativity and love and kindness, and then we have these dark, deep, depraved moments, and so it's this constant rescue and calling back to what we were created to do and be.
That's where one of the fancy words that theologians like to use, the eschatology, like how it all ends.
Yeah,
and how the ending of things, not just the ending of all things, but the ending of things is eschatology. And I was just thinking about that, how things end, change, like that concept intrudes on the present. Like, I'm going to live differently knowing this is where it's going.
Yeah.
This is the way it's going to be. So how should I live now if that's the direction we're going?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way, people always joke, like, man, if I'd have known Apple was going to take off the way they did back in the day, I would have bought that, or if I would have known that, this company was going to do this, I could have, they were going to hire me on in that position and think where I'd be today. Knowing how things, where they're going and what the end looks like should inform the way you live your life right now. If you're wise, if you knew who was going to win the World Series this next year, well, you'd live a little bit differently in that one regard.
And it's interesting, too, that no one gets more than their allotted time. So no matter who you are, no matter how important you are, how famous you are or not, everybody gets 70 to 80 years, like Psalm says, and so you have to figure out. I remember a series that was done back probably in the 70s, 80s, maybe. Francis Schaeffer. Yeah, he was a theologian and a writer and so forth, and he wrote a book called "How Should We Then Live?" And what was he doing? He was addressing how to live a biblical life, a godly life, a worldview in a world that was kind of turning its back on God. And in that season, that was an incredibly relevant and powerful book. Now you look, years later, and there's things like, oh, I wouldn't say that now that way, or that's not the problem now. But every generation has some kind of a struggle. You think about pastors over the last 200 years. What would it be like to be pastoring the church worldwide or in the United States during the American Civil War?
Yeah.
I mean, it would be easy to just be overwhelmed with thinking, this nation's coming to an end. This nation's going to be broken to pieces. And yet, the nation survived, and there was a ton of bloodshed and sorrow and animosity. And so how did those pastors lead faithful congregations through those times, or pastoring during World War II, on an international level? Is the world coming to an end as we know it? Is freedom as we know it, democracy coming to an end? And how do I prepare my people for the future, but how do I teach them to live now?
Yeah,
it's quite a challenge.
Sometimes it's the little ones, the little endings that I think come and go and you didn't even know it was the last. Someone told me one time, and I realized, like, there will be a day when you pick up your child for the last time.
Yeah.
Like, not just because they age out of it.
Sure.
They're still around, but it's the last time you picked them up and put them on your hip because, well, now you're too big for that.
Yep.
And like, oh yeah, or even thinking about the technology changes in the last, 30, 40 years or so. There were ends of things that people didn't know. This was the end.
This is the last Ford Pinto.
Yeah.
I'm going to buy.
Yeah, this is the the end.
Most of you listening don't know what
of rabbit ears on my TV. The end of 3 or 4 channels on your TV.
Yeah,
The end of. We remember when TV used to go off at night. They'd play the national anthem,
a symbol,
and then it would go
and a buzz.
and it'd go to buzz, and that was
That's
the end.
Funny.
And
we're dating ourselves now.
Yeah, I know. With all those things, like there are ends of things. I've going through some ends in my own life right now with my daughters. They ended school. Together. They both graduated college. Faith is getting married. There's the end. There's the end of something.
Of one thing.
And the beginning of something else.
But isn't it true that I can't help but think if I wasn't a believer, in other words, if I wasn't a believer in a God who created us not just for 80 years, but he created us and his world for eternity's purposes.
Yeah.
So then I see endings. If I didn't believe that, if in other words, if this is all there was, and I'm just a bag of chemicals that's going to run its course, that would produce in me, at the very minimum, a melancholy spirit. I would just be kind of just sad and melancholy, or worse, even depressed. And I think that's kind of the philosophies of nihilism and other things that just, if there is no God, it's a dark place because everything has to end. Everything comes to an end. But in the gospel, we have a promise of one ending leads to a beginning, and that beginning is more glorious than the previous state, right?
Yeah.
Death and resurrection is the primary example.
I was just listening to a quote, that nihilism. I was just listening to a quote. It was just a clip taken out of a speech by this guy named Avi Loeb. He's written a couple books, Sapiens, and I can't remember the name of his second book, but he's a Jewish atheist, history professor, and he has a real knack for writing and a knack to kind of bring big stories together.
Yeah.
But his story is so depressing.
Yeah.
The story that he tells is so depressing. And in this clip, he's saying there is no such thing as human rights. They don't exist. Just like there is no God in the clouds above, and there is no hell below, there is no human rights. If you cut a man open and look inside of him, you will not find rights. Like it is just it's just a pretend thing that we do to try to make life better. We pretend that we have rights, but we don't actually have rights. And I thought, yeah, that's right. In your story, it has to just be pretend, because you take God out, and yes, there are no.
That's so
we're just another animal. There are no human rights. But if God exists, then good exists, then we are special creations of His, then all of those things are back on the table.
Yeah.
They do exist, and matter of fact, they're eternally important.
Yeah.
And that right there, just that one piece, the way you see the end, either in the end we just end up in a grave, and that's the end, or there is something beyond this world. Changes everything about whether or not how you treat other people, whether or not you think the person across from you has a right to even exist, or let alone a right to freedom, a right to happiness, a right to all the other things that we talk about when we talk about human rights. But in his story, there was no actual thing as a human right.
It's so interesting because that kind of thinking and that kind of philosophy has just been the fuel for incredible atrocities, throughout the centuries. And on a personal level, I just can't believe that it's even tenable, because when someone's stealing my lawnmower or my mountain bike, there's a certain amount of at least like that's not fair.
Yeah.
Or let alone resistance or call for justice or call the police or something, right? And of course that's probably a Western construct, but man,
and so much of Revelations is about like, okay, church, you're being persecuted right now, and might seems to be making right. Might makes right. Roman Empire says this is what is and what isn't. This is what you can and cannot do. It's up to us. And the picture that John is bringing to them is actually that's not true. There is something behind them called Babylon, and it's in its death throes.
Right.
It's actually losing and dying right now, and it's trying to hang on for all its might. There's a beast behind this. There's a dragon behind this. There's an enemy behind this.
Right.
But overarching, even more real than those things, is there is a God. There is one clothed in white. What we read, in the
feet like burnished bronze,
bronze, hair like wool. I mean, lightning,
eyes,
thunder,
fire,
voice like many waters. Like all that is the most real thing in the universe. And because that is the most real thing, there is justice, and because there is a Christ, a Lamb who was slain from the foundation of the world, actually, even these things that are happening to you will all be made right.
Yeah. We know it instinctively. It says in Scripture that in Ecclesiastes, God has placed eternity in the hearts of men. Mm-hmm. God has placed eternity in the hearts of men. And the guy who wrote that actually was a guy who struggled, Solomon, who struggled greatly with what world has my attention, which world has my allegiance. He was wise and wealthy and powerful and intoxicated, basically, with all of that. And then... And so he's looking at that, but then he's also looking at, God, there's something inside of me that says that's not all there is.
Right. Wealth
and power and accumulation of whatever is just, there's got to be more. And of course there is. There's eternity.
Yeah.
And in that is wrapped up this otherness of God, right? That it's not just me. I don't set the standards. I don't set the law. And that's the wild thing about the West, the Western world, and our concepts of democracy. If you take out scriptural underpinnings, if you take out some sort of outside moral law that's not made up from within us, I'm not sure democracy will survive very long, because then it will be might is right, and whoever's in charge has the has the most influence.
So what's the message to the person right now who they're not first century believers, they're in 2024, and it feels like wow, our culture's taking a nosedive.
Yeah,
my kids are in a school that I no longer trust anymore. Maybe I'm dealing with my own like financial problems.
Law enforcement's breaking down.
What's the message from Revelations to that person today?
Well, I think again, if I didn't have any hope of a bigger sense of creator and maintainer and involved God, who had a standard of justice and a standard of righteousness and was in control of the universe, I would think that the world is out of control, and then I would probably move towards either selfishness or medication or something to numb the pain, right?
Yeah.
But I think the call to the church in Revelation and even today is very similar, that hey, you have got to really check your heart. Your heart. And I'm not talking about the blood pump, obviously. I'm talking about, where does my allegiance lie? Where does my well-being come from? Where does my hope come from? Is my hope in the government? Well, I'm not sure how that's going to work. Is my hope in my 401k? Is my hope in our military might? Or is my hope in God? And then if that's the case, I was just reading earlier this morning in John 15, where Jesus said, if you remain in me, my words remain in you, you're going to bear fruit. You're going to bring forth life. Am I remaining? Am I knit together with my Creator and with what He says and with the Word, and is that my anchor? I guess in a time of storm. Not to use an old or corny illustration, but in a storm, I need to know that I'm not just drifting. I'm not at the mercy of the storm or the wind, and so I have an anchor.
Timothy Keller's one of the pastors that I always really loved and loved to listen to his messages. And I remember, because he'd went from, I don't remember I don't remember where he's from originally, but he went from smaller towns, smaller cities to New York City, and planted this church that began to thrive. And he really spoke then more about almost in defense of the city, that a lot of Christians may like the cities are corrupt, the cities are bad. And in Scripture you see Rome, Babylon, there are
people
there are
gathering.
corruptions there. But he would speak in defense of a city and talk about how, yes, it begins in a garden, but in Revelations it ends in a city.
Yeah.
And I think about that a lot when rereading this through this cycle, getting ready for Revelations. I just thought about that our cities are maybe not in the best shape right now.
Yeah.
I don't think it's controversial to say that, you drive through parts of Salem, parts of Portland here in the Northwest, and it's going to be like, oh, wow, that didn't used to look like this.
Yeah.
What's going on right now?
Yeah.
But there's a redemption. The tree shows up again in Revelations.
Yeah.
But now you find the city of God.
Yeah, at the end.
Yeah.
21 and 22, you see this beautiful city coming down. It's a powerful thought. It's interesting to watch the last few months or the last year as a significant number, I should say, of American cities are in crisis. And even a liberal media, a liberal person, an unbelieving person can't help but look and say, something's wrong. And what's wrong is at its core a human nature issue. And now it spins off into crime or it spins off into something else. But when you think about this redemptive side of God, that he's going to redeem humanity, that transformation is possible because of the gospel. And then that spills over into community, right?
Yeah.
Because cities are nothing more than just a gathering or a community of people who've come to one particular geographical place.
I don't think it's naive or simplistic to say. I'll give an example. If you think the problem is drugs, there's a drug problem, then you're never gonna come to the right conclusion. You can say, well, we have a drug problem, so either we need stricter laws, more police officers. Where is it coming in? How do we cut off the supply? How do we do that? Or you're gonna say, we have a drug problem. We need less laws. We need less, we need to make this free so we're not, jailing people for just smoking pot or, whatever. But you're going to focus your attention on the drugs when the problem isn't drugs.
Yeah.
The problem is the human heart.
Right.
I mean, drugs can be good or bad, right?
Yeah.
They can do amazing things or they can do terrible things. The problem is the human heart.
Yeah.
And that what we need is a savior.
And we talk about that all the time, don't we? The upstream issues. And again, the upstream issues, if you don't want to go all the way upstream where you're going to find your creator and lack of relationship with your creator or rebellion against your creator, well, then you're always going to, I think you're bound to just be constantly doing circles around the downstream issue, which is, hey, drugs are producing addictions are producing homelessness is producing, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So that's why I believe the biblical message is the one that is the most hopeful if Christians are actually walking out the commands and walking out the ways of Jesus in a broken world.
Even if you look at the story of Rome in Revelations, they're trying to do behavior modification.
Yeah.
They're trying to stop this behavior that we don't like. They're telling church, stop, or we will.
Yeah.
And then they use force to change behaviors. And it just doesn't work. No, the only thing that works is transformation. The human heart has to be transformed. Now we're going to talk about parenting. We're going to get into parenting in a parenting class. And of course, behavior modification has to be on the table. I mean, it has
shaping.
Yeah, you got it. You have to. You can't my kid, I'm just trying to transform their heart, so I never correct their behaviors. You correct their behaviors, but the goal isn't the behaviors. The goal is the heart. You're trying to get to their heart eventually. Now, if they're hitting, you stop them from hitting, whatever it takes. You don't just let them run around hitting other kids or hitting you. You stop it. But if you haven't got to the heart, they're just waiting for you to leave the room, and they're going to start hitting again.
Yeah, isn't that why we have a prison system? It's the ultimate end of behavior modification. Like, if you can't stop hurting people, we're going to isolate you from people for the rest of your life or whatever. It's the ultimate.
Yep.
But the answer, the better answer would be that you're changing. Of course, now they say that the goal is, we're gonna re-educate you, or we're gonna bring you back into a functioning member of society. But
so in this,
they're still pretty full.
In this last sermon, the part of the rebuke that goes to the church is you've lost your first love.
Yeah.
And there's still he praises their behaviors. You're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this, and you're doing it well.
You're enduring.
Good job. But your heart has wandered. Your heart has not loved like it did at one time. And it blows my mind. I remember like, oh yeah, this can't just be I'm doing the right things. There still has to be the hard work, which it is harder to love than to just do the right thing. Because the right thing can be quantified, like, oh, I'm supposed to give to this cause. So okay, here's the amount of money, and I gave.
Wow.
But if I'm supposed to care about that cause and love that cause, well, that's going to change my whole life.
Yeah.
I can't just give away the thing and now it's over. Good, I'm done. Check it off the list.
Yeah.
If I have to love, then there's no end to that.
The scary part about what you just said is that downstream you can do the right thing for all the wrong reasons.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You can do it for reward, you can do it for punishment, fear of punishment. You know, if you think about it, I remember one time my wife and I were up the gorge, the gorge there outside of Portland on 84, and there's a famous falls called Multnomah Falls, and it's beautiful. I don't know how several hundred feet drop, and so we did a hike up the side and around up, looking for the top. We were trying to get to the top. Well, somewhere up there is the top. The mountains don't go forever. Somewhere there is a pool where that falls begin. You can use this illustration with anything, Multnomah Falls, Niagara Falls, whatever. Now, there's tributaries along the way.
But there's a headwater.
There's this highest pool. There's this source. And that's, I think, this center, if you will, or throne of the human heart. What's at the top? Where the water flows down, and again, on the way, it may pick up a few contaminants. It may pick up this or that. But unless I think we go to that highest point and make and that becomes the main thing that we pay attention to. I don't know. I think you can spend a lot of time and energy just trying to fix what's going on downstream.
Yep. Yeah, which is, as pastors, I know we often get tricked into dealing with downstream stuff.
Well, and sometimes they're just clamoring. You can't ignore them.
We get the phone call often because of downstream stuff.
Yeah.
This has happened. Help.
Yeah.
And you're always trying to like, okay, yes, this needs attention.
Oh.
But if we don't want to do this again, how do we go up from there and find what led you to do this in the first place? What got you here?
Yeah. What's gone wrong? I would be curious to hear from anybody listening out there who's in law enforcement or education who doesn't have that same sort of a struggle like, oh, I feel like all I do every day is deal with the symptoms rather than be able to fix and deal with the cause.
Oh, in doing foster care, we're constantly thinking, how do we break the cycle?
Yeah.
You look at the family of origin, you look at their history, and you're like, okay, it's so easy to get mad at mom and dad who got in the situation.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they did
immediate
something
thing.
terrible.
Yeah.
And then you realize, oh, well, they're just repeating a pattern that was handed to them.
Yeah,
That's all they know.
They're drinking the water that came downstream.
Yeah. And so how do we then change this in someone's life?
That's the beauty of the gospel, because the gospel is the only force that has this eternal power to change the trajectory of a human life or a family or generations, right?
Yeah.
You and I know so many people whose lives were turned around that are either part of recovery programs or part of our community that will tell you, like, listen, this stops here in my generation. I inherited this, but this just stops here, and it's going to be different. Not perfect, but definitely different.
Maybe let's, they got a couple questions, if it's okay, we get to them. This one, I think, makes the most sense right now, actually, to what we've been talking about, because it's behavior modification, getting to someone's heart. It's a parent saying, how do you deal with an 8-year-old daughter who lies a lot and doesn't seem to mind at all about doing it until she's caught? Yeah, it's such a great question, because it is one of those things like, well, yeah, you can't have your kid going around lying.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to deal with this. It's going to ruin their life if they grow up to be a liar.
Absolutely.
So I've got to teach this, but they only seem to care when I'm in the room, when I get caught. When they're caught, then they feel bad. When they're not caught, they don't seem to have this internal thing that says I shouldn't do this. So how do I change that? What they're asking.
Yeah, that's the challenge. I mean, that's a question that could be asked 100 different ways. But when you see behavior that you know is going to be painful, destructive, hurtful, again, you can bring forces to bear of threat
Yeah.
or bribe. If you stop doing this, I'll do this for you, and if you don't stop, I'm going to
Yeah.
lock you away or
Yeah.
put you in timeout
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
But the challenge is getting past that to this little human heart and conscience that's inside of there.
Yeah.
There's been huge debate over the last 20, 30 years about the place of guilt and shame. How do you deal with, what do you do with guilt and shame? Is it right or is it wrong? I think, and again, I'm not an expert, but it would seem to me that there's some measure of guilt is this recognition, right? That what I'm doing isn't good. I'm hurting people that I should be loving. Now, shame is another, maybe a level of that or another depth of that. But I think part of that is this awareness of the human heart that says, this isn't good.
I would say it's okay. Like when kids misbehave in ways that is going to hurt them and hurt others. Like you want to make the cost of their bad behavior too much for them to want to pay. Right? Like I don't, lying costs me too much right now. And an 8-year-old can get pretty good at lying, but you can usually figure it out. As a parent, they're not quite at that point where they're really smarter than you. You can usually figure it out. You can usually, get down to the bottom of it. And I think you want to make that behavior costly for them so that they feel, because for whatever reason, she's not, and that doesn't mean, lots of kids go through this. It's not like she's got some terrible, problem. We're not raising psychopaths. Sometimes when you raise a little kid, you're like, oh my goodness, he just hit another kid. Am I raising a psychopath? No, you're raising a sinner. We're all sinners. You were a sinner. I'm a sinner. It's the way it is. So it's okay to make the cost, whatever. And you can't really nail that down for one kid, I don't think, because I know what worked for me didn't work for my sister. Like they could, take something away from my sister, take the same thing away from me, and I don't care. You have to find like what matters to them. And then, let them feel the cost. But you're also trying to get that measure of empathy in them. And that's a lot harder to do. Like, how do I get them to feel that this hurts me? And at that age, they know, like, oh, other people exist. Other feelings exist.
Yeah.
Like because when kids are really little, they don't even quite yet realize other people have feelings.
Yeah.
But then they hit an age, and by 8, they're definitely there, when they realize, oh, my actions can make people, like, it's not just what I feel in the world, other people feel things too. So trying to just slowly convince them, when you do this, it makes me feel like this. When you lied about her, it made her feel like this. And trying to connect it to them. Has anybody ever lied to you and it hurt? Yeah, you know that feeling? That's the way you're making mom feel, or that's the way you made sister feel when you lied.
Yeah. When you're a parent dealing with young children, I mean, I think for a while there was a philosophy that said, well, just let them decide, let them analyze it, let them reflect on it. But I think that's where a parent has to step in and point it out and be the structure. That's why I think passivity is like the worst response you could possibly have, of just saying, well, it's just a stage. They're just going to grow. They'll grow out of that.
I've never been a fan of laughing at bad behavior in kids. Or ignoring, like, if I just ignore the behavior, if I just ignore the lying, it'll go away. I mean, it might, but it might not.
Might not, yeah. And that tilted universe that we live in is not going to confront that. It's actually going to tend to feed that kind of a behavior because it's selfish behavior. I lie because there's something I want or I don't want to happen. So that's why I tell lies, right? Whether you're 8 years old or whether you're 58, right? And so somehow there has to be, but we're back to the upstream conversation a little bit, aren't we? That I think that's why bringing the gospel to bear on in a family and in the raising of children gives them a sense of there is somebody out there that has said this is right and this is wrong, and here's why. It's not just some capricious, well, here's what I think, this is what you're going to do and this is what you're going to believe. But God's never like that. He talks to us about, in the stories and in the theme of the Bible, you see the fruit of bad and good decisions. Choose life, he says. To the Old Testament Israelites who were drifting. He said, listen, choose life. Come, let us reason together. So God's a reasonable God who who designed us and created us to be reasonable people. Of course, sometimes an 8-year-old or even a 58-year-old is not reasonable because they're stubborn or something. But
yeah, sometimes I'm not reasonable.
Yeah.
But you usually are, right?
Well, we get, all of us have these moments where self-centeredness and self-indulgence seems to take hold. And
yeah, that's the part that always, in parenting, like when my kids would be like surprised that I knew what was going on, they'd be like, how did you know? It's like he can read my mind. I always just think to myself, like, no, I'm just like you.
Oh gosh.
Like I'm also a liar. I'm also a thief. I'm also, selfish. I'm all the things that you are when you're little.
Gosh, yeah.
I've felt all the things that you're feeling, so you're just not tricking me because I know.
If anybody's ever sat in on an AA meeting or a recovery group meeting, that's one of the things that I think make them effective. There's like it's a no BS zone, like because you can't. There's this sense of we're going to call you out because we know exactly what that sounds like. We know exactly what's going on. They recognize manipulation and they recognize those kinds of things that have hounded them, and so they want to be done. They want to move forward, but they're not going to let it go on in the gathering, right? Yep. And sometimes I think church would be better off with that kind of approach. But
yeah. What'd you call it? No
BS zone.
What's that stand for?
Yeah, you can get with me later and I'll explain that. But back to the thing of parenting. Parenting. I think is just this for the challenge for us as parents, as mothers and fathers or single parents, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's this understanding that I've been given this little child to shape. It's not like I'm going to let someone else do it. I'm the primary person that is in their life. I don't want to outsource the shaping of my children to the education system or to the media or to somebody else.
Or, is it fair to say, or to themselves?
Yeah.
I feel like some of the more hands-off approach to parenting now, I feel like my kid will become whatever they're supposed to become. They'll decide what they're going to be. And I certainly don't want to stifle. I want to learn, how did God design my child? Yeah. What are the gifts and talents that
and
He gave my child?
And how do I cooperate with that?
And then foster and cooperate that kind of growth. But unfortunately, like you say, we live in a slanted world, and we are sin sick. And so left to our own devices, we don't do good things.
Yeah.
We don't turn out good. We need a guide. And God put kids in families so that they could have
it just
guides.
Seems that kind of approach, there's got to be a little bit of that's a little bit of naive thinking, right? That my 8 or 9-year-old can discover who they're going to be, because the fact is they're not going to live in an isolated box in a back room. Someone's going to have input. They're going to gather input from peers, from media, from whatever. And so who gets there first and who has the most sway?
If you don't parent your child, someone will.
Yeah, someone will. Something's going to shape their behavior, shape their thinking. Yeah. That's just a fact of human life.
Okay, there's another question here. It's a really good one, and I know I've realized actually we've gone a little while now, but maybe let's go ahead and try. A few weeks ago, you talked about how we shouldn't get distracted and argue about relatively frivolous things such as dimensions of the temple. My question then is, how far can we carry out this idea? And then he shares a little example saying, as an example, I found that I'm caring less and less about the different interpretations of creation. I assume he's meaning basically in the chapters 1, 2, and 3. And the early bits of Genesis. I don't say the Old Testament is worthless, but I just can't bring myself to care about how literal Genesis is supposed to be taken. Still, I wonder if I'm basically cutting out part of the Bible because I find it too troublesome.
Yeah. That's a great question, whoever sent that in. Thanks. I think that's a super relevant question to where we live today, because we live in the information age. We're inundated with information, whether that's just silly, simple stuff like the clickbait of politics or sexuality or Hollywood or whatever, but there's no end to just stuff coming at us that provokes or some kind of a response. Is this right? Do you agree? Do you not agree? Yeah. And I think it can just consume us and take us away from the main thing. Now, it's not that some of those things might be important, but is it the main thing? Because if the main thing isn't the main thing in my life, then those things will take up I don't have unlimited bandwidth. No one has unlimited bandwidth. No. Unlimited time or unlimited capacity to love or whatever. So everything that comes my way it wants a piece of me. And I just have always been suspicious of people who live on the peripheral, who live out on those. They said, listen, if you can answer the question about why Job had his suffering, or if you can answer the question about did Adam have a belly button or some other thing, could God make a rock that he couldn't move, then I would. Yeah. But I think it's approaching it totally
backwards. Is this
backwards.
one of the laws we're supposed to keep right now?
Yeah.
Or,
yeah.
There's a guy, Philip Schaff, who was a church historian, philosopher, theologian, and he had a phrase that I think has been really, really useful to me. He says, in essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; in all things, charity. So what he's saying is, if it's essential to the gospel, then we better agree on it. You can't have your way and I have my way. Like, if it's essential to the gospel, are we created in God's image? That's essential to the gospel. I don't think you can take that out and still have the gospel. I think we are created in the image of God, by God.
Right.
How he created us in his image, I don't know that we have to 100% agree on that. But if we can't come to the conclusion together that we are created in God's image, then we're probably not we're not believing the same thing. Non-essentials, liberty. So if something is not essential to the gospel, then I have a freedom and you have a certain freedom to say, okay, you see it this way, I see it that way. And there are some things that are like, I think this is pretty important. You have to see it this way to be a believer. And deciding what those things are kind of happens in these denominations and churches, as they say, oh, hey, you have to believe this, to be a believer, or at least to be in this camp. Here's well, I don't know if I want to go down that road or not. In all things, charity. So whether or not, even in all things, I need to be loving no matter what. So the 6 days of creation is one of the things he specifically asked. Like, well, am I letting go of something if I don't care that much about? Like, maybe it was 6 days. Maybe it was 6,000 years. Maybe it means something completely different, but I do believe that God created everything and that Adam and Eve were real historical people who really fell, and that changed, everything. I think there's a liberty in how we see those things.
Oh. If you read, if you're listening and you're not a believer in the Christian message, the Christian story, then I would just say that the Bible that we use is 66 books that we use, and those books are a wide variety of authors and a wide variety of subjects, but the common theme through the book is God creating, man, sinning, and then God redeeming, and then the end of, we talked about earlier, this end of all things are made new. And all through those books, those 66 books, is this theme of this Redeemer. Yeah. And then, of course, in the life of Jesus, we see him show up and say, I am the way, I am the truth, and the life. No man's going to come to the Father except through me. He says, by this one thing, all men will know that you are my disciples, that you love one another. So you have to look at that and go, okay, so is the main thing that by this all men will know that you're my disciples, that you use the same version of the Bible, that you eat the same food, that you celebrate the same days, that you believe this about what happened over here. I just think that it's so easy to miss the main thing and make the peripheral thing a big deal, so much so that it divides us and confuses us and even detours us.
I would speak to this last sentence. Still, I wonder if I'm basically cutting out part of the Bible because I find it too troublesome. I would encourage whoever wrote this, anyone else, to really be aware of that. That sometimes we can let really important things go to compromise with our culture and say, oh, they really don't like this Jonah story. It just doesn't, so I don't care. I think you should care.
Yeah.
I don't think you should let something go just because it would take a miracle for it to be true, because it takes a miracle for the Word of God to be true.
Yeah.
So if your problem with 6 days of creation is that it would take a miracle, well, then it's not going to work for you to have any belief, because resurrection is going to take a miracle. Everything,
this whole story
is based on some miraculous. And so if you're letting some things go because they don't fit the natural order of the universe, our God is supernatural. He breaks the natural order of the universe. Yeah. So don't let that be the reason you've decided to not care about some of the stories in the Old Testament, because you're ceding part of your faith to the anti-God, purely scientific materialism story that eventually will want to eat the resurrection as well.
That's right.
And I would just say, obviously, don't ever let that happen. That is not a good reason to allow for liberty in how we see, like we should have liberty in how we see some of these events, how they took place, what that looks like. Just don't let it be because it seems too hard to believe, because it is hard to believe, and that's good.
Yeah. The miracles are the doorway, right? What you're saying reminds me so much of an interview I read with Larry King, the well-known, he interviewed tens of thousands of people over his career, and agnostic, a Jew, who had a history, obviously, way back of some kind of, God-centered worldview, but long since drifted. And he was asked if he could interview anybody in human history, who it would be, and he said, Jesus Christ. And they said, well, what would you ask him? He said, I just have one question. Are you truly virgin born? And the answer to that would change everything for me. Isn't that interesting? His whole, if I will or will not believe, hinged on the miracle of the virgin birth. And so you think, well, that's a little key that opens a big door.
Yeah. Michael Heiser, he's passed away now, but he's a great Bible guy, theologian. You can still find all of his podcasts and stuff. He just passed away not that long ago. But he would do this wild thing where he would go to UFO conferences. I know you think I'm just trying to bring UFOs into this, but he would go to UFO conferences and he would speak, and they would have him. They liked him, and he said, you know what? He said, oftentimes I find people more willing to believe the supernatural at the UFO conference than I do at my church.
That's so, gosh, you can imagine, right?
Yeah. I just thought that is so wild. Like we've become so secular that we struggle to believe what, the facts of the gospel. And that he has an easier time sometimes showing them, like, well, they already believe there is something greater than the natural at this UFO conference. And so I come and show them the supernatural in the Word of God. And interesting. All right. Well, thanks, Bruce.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, it's fun. Revelation is going to be going on for a few weeks. I encourage you to jump in. Like we said at the start of this, if you're afraid of Revelation, just start by reading the first 3 chapters and the last 3 chapters.
Whet your appetite,
Yeah, just read the first 3, the last 3, and I think it'll give you like a taste to want to eat the rest and dig in.
Yeah. If this helps you or you like this, pass it on to somebody else. Let us know. Let them know about our podcast. We'd love to expand the audience.
Yeah, feel free to send in some questions, comments down below. We'll try to take a look at them and see how we can answer those questions. All right.
Hope your week goes well.
Yep. Bless you guys. Bye.
Take care.